The console Valorant beta has officially released. Here's everything you need to know to get ahead of the competition. Let's get into it. Counter-strafing is by far the most important mechanic for you to master in Valorant. But in order to understand counter-strafing, we need to know the base mechanics of the game. It's important to know that in Valorant, you have to be still while shooting in order for your bullets to go straight. If you're moving around, your bullets are going to go everywhere and it will be impossible to hit consistent shots, especially to the head. So it's very important to balance moving to make yourself a harder target to hit, but also being still while you're shooting to make sure your bullets are going straight. This is where the idea of counter-strafing comes in. On controller, you have two ways to counter-strafe. The first being the simpler of the two, and this is when you're moving, you release the stick to its default position, making you still in game and you shoot off that. The other is doing counter inputs, meaning if I'm moving right and want to stop, I'm going to quickly slam my joystick left and then let it recenter. This allows you to counter your rightward movement with a left movement, instantly stopping your agent and allowing you to shoot just a tad bit quicker. For those that are new to FPSs or new to controller, it's not a bad idea to learn the first way. If you're a more experienced player or are used to counter-strafing from other tactical shooters, I would definitely recommend getting used to the second one. The last thing I want to talk about in counter-strafing is an idea called dead zoning. The idea of dead zoning allows you to be moving pretty much the entire time while still getting a shot or two in between the changes of direction. Meaning if I'm going right and then I instantly slam my stick left, there's going to be a couple frames within that transition from going right to left that my character model will actually be still. That's the amount of time you have to aim and shoot in when dead zoning. I have a feeling for most players this is going to be near impossible to do while naturally counter-strafing, but this is a great thing to implement when jiggle peeking corners or trying to get quick kills when swinging. We'll talk more about this later. The second most important mechanic for you to master in Valorant is crosshair placement. Unlike most games, crosshair placement or centering makes up for over 80% of your aim, making flicking or having to adjust outside of this range only 20%. Having your crosshair ready and waiting where the enemy is most likely to be is crucial to getting kills in Valorant. In a game where you die in one bullet to the head, there is almost zero margin for error, and having to react outside of this range is usually going to result in a death no matter how good your raw aim is. Within crosshair placement, you have two sections, vertical and horizontal. Vertical crosshair placement means your crosshair is sitting at head level at all times going through the map. This is crucial because you'll almost never be perfectly horizontally centered on somebody. So if your vertical crosshair placement is good, you just have to adjust left or right instead of diagonally, which is just naturally harder. Horizontal crosshair placement is typically used for holding angles when you're expecting an enemy to come around a corner. This is important to make sure you're not too close to the wall and forcing yourself to adjust outwards, but you also don't want to be too far and have to meet the enemy. That sweet spot will be different for everybody depending on reaction times, setups, and comfortability with the game. Just for reference, I'm usually holding around here for an average swing. The next thing we're going to talk about is swinging angles. There's three main things to consider when swinging: 90-degree angles, no slow or short swings, and angle advantage. Swinging angles at 90 degrees is essential to make yourself appear as quick as possible on the enemy's screen. For example, if I'm moving at a 0-degree angle from the enemy, even though I'm running at full speed, he can hit a headshot without moving his crosshair the entire time. If I'm moving at 45 degrees from the enemy, I'm going to displace his crosshair. However, I'm going to displace it about half as much than if I was moving at 90 degrees from the enemy. The way to do this correctly is to visualize where the enemy is going to be, the exact line or angle he's going to be holding, and you want to intersect that line at a 90-degree angle with your movement. Next, let's talk about no slow or short swings. To fully understand this, you need to understand the advantage and disadvantages of holding and swinging angles. When holding an angle, generally you're going to get first shot off pretty much every time because you're standing still, the other person is moving, so generally you're going to be able to get the shot off before him. The disadvantage of holding an angle is that you're standing still, meaning you're an easier target to hit than somebody full swinging out at you. The advantage of swinging is just that you're a harder target to hit than the person standing still. The disadvantage of swinging is you're almost always going to get second shot compared to the person holding, meaning that when you're swinging, you actually need to force the enemy to miss before you really even have a chance to shoot back. So swinging an angle while walking or swinging an angle super tight where a lot of times you're just going to land in their crosshair placement generally is going to end up in an easy death. You want to force them to re-aim and adjust when you swing them to make them hit a hard shot. So make sure you're approaching angles not only at 90 degrees, but also at a full running speed each time. Lastly, we'll talk about angle advantage. Angle advantage applies in two areas. The first is if we swing too close to a wall, you're going to allow the enemy to see you before you see them. For example, if I'm sitting here and an enemy is there, they're going to see about half of my body and I can't see them at all. But if I back up at the same angle, just 1 or 2 steps, we now see half of each other and it's a 50-50 fight. So make sure when you're swinging angles, you're at least a step or 2 away from the closest wall to make sure you guys see each other at the same time. This also applies in a general sense. Whoever's the furthest from the angle will see the other person first every time. So for example, if I'm sitting in a corner and somebody swings me along the back wall, they're going to see about half of my body before I see them at all. So make sure when you're peeking and sitting in corners that you're considering this concept. The last thing we're going to talk about is gunfight hygiene. These are just some different mechanics in the game and different techniques people are using within gunfights. First, we're going to talk about crouching. Crouching does have some useful applications like crouching under a cipher trip, and it does generally make recoil control easier. However, generally I try to stay away from crouching as it lowers your mobility, and in my opinion, being a hard target to hit is way more important than any of the benefits it's going to give you in a gunfight. So in general, trying to counter strafe and staying on your feet is your best bet. On the topic of spraying, I also try to avoid spraying as much as possible. In general, spray patterns are not consistent past your 7th or 8th bullet, and I also think being accurate while trying to control a spray with a joystick is just not optimal. So that leaves you with tapping and bursting. Tapping meaning you're shooting 1 bullet at a time, and bursting meaning you're shooting about 2 to 3 bullets at a time. Either of these can be utilized with counter strafing. The only advantage that tapping would have over bursting would be that you're only shooting 1 bullet, so you get to move quicker after shooting as opposed to shooting 2 or 3. But in general, I think shooting 2 to 3 bullets and then moving is going to be the best of both worlds, giving you a couple bullets to hit the shot while still being mobile. Lastly, I want to talk about ADSing and focus mode. ADSing in Valorant does some interesting things. It makes your movement a tad bit slower, as well as your fire rate a tad bit slower. It also does affect some guns differently. Obviously, scope weapons are a little different, but for guns like the Stinger and Bulldog, it actually turns it into a burst weapon. As well as guns like the Odin and Ares, you actually do want to ADS most of the time. Generally, I do stay away from ADSing. The only time I really find it useful is with a Vandal or maybe a Guardian when you're shooting 1 bullet at a time, or like I mentioned, the Odin and the Ares do actually get some decent benefits from it. Focus mode I don't think is fully figured out yet. I think there definitely will be some different ideas on how to utilize it best in the future. For right now, generally I use focus mode for small adjustments when I'm already near the head or for super long range gunfights. Outside of that, generally I'm hip firing for the most part. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be giving away 1 console Valorant beta code down in the comments. Just tell me what you're most excited about the game, and we'll pick a winner in a couple days. If this video helped you out at all, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like it in the future. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one.